So for those that have been following my journey, they know that I've been looking at ways much further or much way beyond just chucking myself into cold water. You know that I'm exploring a number of different methods, and I know that many of you out there are on the same journey as me doing this and exploring methods. I also know that some of you, unfortunately, have some form of ailment, be it a chronic illness or autoimmune disease, or some I know have had bouts of depression. So I think my next guest here, this is my second interview on my YouTube channel. My next guest, I think, will prove very interesting for you folk out there. She's a lovely lady by the name of Elizabeth Clark, who has been doing some rather wonderful things to improve her physical health and rid herself of some of the chronic issues that I know some of you folk might be experiencing right now. So I will introduce you to her. And Elizabeth, if you could just give us a brief bio that introduces you, and then I'll start probing a bit with some questions. So here we are, Elizabeth, over to you.
Hi. So I basically started this self-healing journey about 10 years ago when I was maybe 18, 19. I'm 31 now. And I had been raised by really health conscious parents. I was raised vegetarian because that's what everyone thought you should be back in the 80s and 90s. And when I hit my teenage years, I started dealing with a lot of depression and anxiety, and even later on, addiction. And I had a really tough time, as a lot of teenagers do, until I just kind of by happenstance found out about epigenetics and nutrigenomics. I had an abnormal psychology professor who made me read this book called A Dose of Sanity, and then I read another one by the same author, Sydney Walker, called The Hyperactivity Hoax. And then I just could not stop reading stuff that was kind of along the same lines. And this was back when Amazon first existed. So Amazon was just books. And I got into Amazon, and it was like, if you like A Dose of Sanity, you'll like this one and this one and this one. And away I went. And it led to me healing my depression, anxiety, and addiction through nutrigenomics. And maybe 2 years later, I was diagnosed with lupus. And I didn't really know anything about lupus. When I was diagnosed, my doctor basically said, women are living past their 40s now with medication. And I didn't really accept that because I came to find out that my paternal grandmother had lupus, and at this time she was still alive. So, I don't think that doctor really knew anything about lupus except for, just kind of the old stuff that was out there on it. And, back maybe 50 years ago, that was the case. But I knew that you could have a basically normal life with medication. So I thought, well, maybe you can have a normal life without medication too. So I eventually looked into the nutrigenomics and the epigenetics of autoimmune disease. And after I had my methylation pathway mapped with genetic testing, I just dove into PubMed, and I was there every second that I wasn't working. At the time, I was a nutritionist working in community nutrition, and then I would just go home at night and dive into basically personal nutrition. It doesn't get more personalized than nutrigenomics. And within a year of that journey, I had 0 blood tests that were positive for lupus. So I had no more lupus biomarkers at all. And I felt amazing. I was just so, my brain was just like so engaged all the time. And I felt good. And then I decided with all of this newfound energy, I would go to grad school. So I went back to grad school to get my master's in nutrition science. And I was so into research that that was my focus. I wanted to do a thesis master's and just research. And that was extremely stressful and physically and emotionally stressful. And I started feeling sick again, but my lupus markers were still normal. It's like, I don't know how this can be. This is definitely immune system related. It's an immune imbalance of some sort. And eventually I realized that I had mold illness, which is very similar to Lyme and multiple sclerosis. The genetic predisposition is similar, and the environmental activators are similar, and the symptoms are almost identical. So then I set out to heal that. And what I discovered was that it wasn't so much nutrigenomics and epigenetics as it was activating your self-healing mechanism. So for your methylation pathway, you can go and look at very specific polymorphisms and kind of reverse engineer yourself. But with something like mold illness, which isn't autoimmune, it's your innate immune system. You have to take a more of a macroscopic view than a microscopic view. So I set out to activate my self-healing mechanism, really unbeknownst to me. I had no idea that's what I was doing, but in retrospect, that's exactly what I was doing. And I did it. I healed from mold illness, and then I just hit the ground running. You know, once I realized that I wasn't going to have to live my life on disability and I could contribute to the world, I started and haven't looked back.
That is amazing. That is quite a story, and you are amazing. Let's just say that, because
Thank you.
what I love there, actually, that last bit there, when you especially around the sort of the macro way of looking at it, and some of the things that you were doing, you only realised afterwards, after the fact, that that's what you were doing. I think that's really interesting. You've covered so many topics there already that it's difficult to know which one to delve into. I guess you could term yourself in a number of different ways, but I love the way you describe yourself as a self-healer, because let's face it, that's good, easy to understand, descriptive, and you are a perfect example of somebody that has done this with some pretty serious chronic illnesses there, some of which could and probably have had pretty negative results on people, and I'm guessing with lupus ended people's lives early.
Yes, definitely in more severe cases. And mine was never as severe as some of the case studies that I've seen, and some of the people that I've known personally definitely had a worse time of it. But in general, all of those things are things that are supposed to be incurable, things that have no cure. You can supposedly manage them with medication and in some cases lifestyle change. But I mean, when you think about depression and anxiety, you're never going to go to the doctor and have them say, you know, I have the cure.
Yeah.
You know, you're just going to go and get some sort of advice on management.
Well, with depression and anxiety, they still haven't caught up. You know, right. It's kind of, it really is stick a plaster on it type psychology, isn't it? Certainly in this country, here's some pills, which really, really annoys the hell out of me, because I know that those things to do with the mind in particular really can be treated through quite simple methods. But what you've done is much further than that, and really interesting. So, by the way, as an aside, you know that I have a dog called Winston, Elizabeth. He sat right next to me at my feet. Now, the problem with Winston sitting there at this time of the day is that he starts to cry every now and again and make funny noises. So for those watching this, it's not me making those noises, it is Winston, in case you were wondering. But let's get back to you. So when you referred to their mold illness, how similar is it to MS? And do you think the methods that you employed for mold, other people could do for MS?
It is Very similar in terms of treatment as well. The similarities in terms of genetics would be that it seems that the predominant genetic predisposition is located on your HLA gene. So this is your human leukocyte antigen gene. And it's such a large gene that they really don't look at it in terms of polymorphism. They look at it in terms of haplotype. So you're really looking at several different aspects of it that basically give you a pattern. So the pattern of your HLA haplotype that would predispose you to MS is different than the pattern that predisposes you to mold illness, although there is one haplotype that makes you susceptible to basically all of these things. So you can, the haplotype is kind of the pattern of the variants on the HLA gene, if that makes sense. So you'll see, you have to really have a sort of a Rosetta Stone to decode this. And the craziest part about this is that the literature all uses different terms and different numbers and different indicators. It's extremely complicated, and it's really just in its infancy. But what you'll find is if you go into PubMed and try to find like an autism HLA haplotype or multiple sclerosis HLA haplotype, you'll find that a lot of them overlap.
I wonder, could we delve into some specifics here? Is there an easy way of describing what you did from the point of realizing you had it to the point of getting rid of it? What was the process?
Wow, yeah. So it was probably a 3 or 4 year process, and maybe even longer when I look back at when I first started to think it was possible. My earliest symptoms were basically hypothyroidism. And usually hypothyroidism has a cause. So it can be autoimmune in and of itself. So you can create antibodies to your thyroid hormone receptors or something like that. I'm not a Hashimoto's expert by any means, but that wasn't the case with me. I just had hypothyroidism, and they were just very classic symptoms. And all of the doctors were just kind of like, oh yeah, hypothyroidism, that's cut and dry. You take thyroid hormone. And I just kept thinking, but why do I have hypothyroidism? Your thyroid just doesn't stop working. That's not an etiology to just say, well, it is what it is, you know? So that was kind of the first thing that clued me in. It was like dry skin, my hair falling out, tired all the time. It didn't matter how much I slept, I was tired. Sorry, technical difficulties. So, yeah, all these things that people associate with turning a certain age or being stressed out at work or not taking care of yourself with diet and exercise, all of these things were happening to me. And none of these sort of classic triggers existed. You know, I was taking care of myself. Work was, you know, not that stressful. It was community nutrition. I was getting to connect with moms on a daily basis and, you know, hang out with their kids and talk about my favorite topic, nutrition. So none of the things that the doctors were saying were causing my symptoms were causing my symptoms. And I knew that. And I think a lot of people know that. And they trust their doctor because doctors mean well. And a lot of doctors know what they're doing. But when a doctor is giving you this answer that's just like, it is what it is, you have to look further. So that's what I did. I just, I looked further, and I had a friend who knew that I was into epigenetics, and he referred me to a podcast where one of my favorite doctors was being interviewed. And it just so happened to be Dave Asprey's Bulletproof podcast. And the more I listened, the more I heard about mold illness. And I started thinking, well, you know, this all started when, and this is the crazy part, this all started when I took one of my grandmother's dressers, a piece of furniture from her house, to refurbish it because I loved refurbishing old furniture. And it all started around that time. And when I went to refurbish this dresser that had been sitting maybe 3 feet away from me as I slept every night for, a month, I opened the drawers to find it was covered in mold on the inside. And this is the grandmother that had lupus. So the realization for me was that I have lupus and mold illness. She had lupus, probably also mold illness. How can these things be completely unrelated? And how can my thyroid be unrelated to either of those things? So that was what got me started, just a series of coincidences. They weren't really coincidences, but we're taught to believe that they're coincidences.
Really interesting. I was about to sound like Tom Bellew, if you've ever come across him on YouTube. He always answers somebody by saying, "Hey, that's super interesting." So I was about to sound like him then, but it is genuinely. I'm very, very interested in that. It's always good to hear and understand. Or I think when you have that light bulb moment of, "Oh, that's the catalyst," that really helps, doesn't it? It kind of that starts your story. But I suppose what would be really helpful, I think, for anybody watching this channel right now is you've done all these wonderful things. You've cured yourself of these conditions. But in the curing of them, in your case, it wasn't simply a case of burning that dresser. What did you do to actually get it out of your system? And interesting about the hypothyroidism as well, actually, because I keep coming across that. And by the way, if anybody watching my channel has hypothyroidism, don't do the Wim Hof method, because that will accelerate your problems. But anyway, carry on, please, Elizabeth. Yeah, I'm just really interested to hear, apart from burning that dresser, what else did you do?
Yes. Yeah. So I'll give you kind of the two part to that. So the first part of healing the mold illness was doing kind of the classical treatment for it, which is the shoemaker protocol, or the original shoemaker protocol, at least. So this is Dr. Richie Shoemaker. He discovered this illness actually in people who lived near a fish kill estuary. So there's actually a lot of causes to chronic inflammatory response syndrome, and mold is just one of them. So the actual illness is chronic inflammatory response syndrome, but for me, mold was the biotoxin. So it's basically biotoxin illness. So he discovered this with a different biotoxin, which I believe was Listeria. And his protocol involves basically a pyramid of things that you address in a specific order. So you can't do it out of order. And that was one of the key things in healing mold illness, is that your body is like a game of Jenga. You can't just go in and start pulling things out. Like, you have to have a process and know what your body needs to have addressed first, not what you think needs to be addressed first. And so that was his process, which was, if I remember correctly, I think 6 months prior to really starting, you had to upregulate your antioxidants. So you had to take, I think it was 4,000 milligrams of fish oil a day, which doesn't seem that crazy to me. But if you look at the back of the bottle, that's going to sound insane, because it'll say take like 500 or 400 milligrams a day. So you do like a high dose antioxidant treatment for a few months, and then you start to pull the biotoxins out of your body with binders. So activated coconut charcoal. Dr. Shoemaker recommends some prescription ones that are actually, he recommends them off label. So he prescribes them off label, or at least he did back in the day. But their real purpose is for lowering cholesterol. So they're bile acid sequestrants. So the issue, the genetic predisposition that comes into play here, is that you can't recognize biotoxins as antigens. So you can't bind them in your bile, and you can't get rid of them. So it only affects people who have this susceptibility. So that's what the bile acid sequestrants and binders do, is they bind the biotoxins in your bile, because your body is not doing a very good job of that. And that is probably like the flagship of that treatment, is that you have to get those biotoxins out of your body. But then after that, some people don't automatically get better, because once you have this chronic inflammatory response syndrome going on, a lot of your really key neuropeptides become lower than optimal. So vasoactive intestinal peptide, VIP, melanocyte stimulating hormone, MSH, these things cause all of the hypothyroid things that I was going through. These things cause intestinal permeability, aka leaky gut. So if your body doesn't automatically start producing those neuropeptides again after you get the biotoxins out, then you go through a process of trying to balance not only those neuropeptides, but other hormones as well. So antidiuretic hormone, cortisol, and even your sex hormones, even estrogen and progesterone and testosterone and DHEA. So that is basically the end of it. Once you've balanced all of those hormones, you're done. And that was what I tried to do for at least 2 years without a whole lot of success. That got me probably 80% there, but every time I would be re-exposed to mold, I would have to start right back at the beginning, and the symptoms would start right back at the beginning. And that's typical. I'm not an anomaly in that sense. So the second, part 2 of healing mold illness was finding out how to really efficiently activate my self-healing mechanism. And I did that through a whole host of things, but eight of them I could do at home, basically. So there are 8 evidence-based ways to activate PGC1 alpha, your self-healing mechanism, through at-home techniques, and some of them are free. Fasting is free.
I was going to ask you about the PGC1 alpha, actually, because that's a new term that I've come across. But before I do, what I love about that is that Western medicine has been incredible, obviously, over the last 100 years in particular, and the advances are amazing. However, and you can't down Western medicine, absolutely, but I think we can say that, certainly in this country, I would imagine the same for you guys, that doctors are so overworked and time limited as far as patients are concerned. Don't forget, obviously, with the NHS in this country, so it's slightly different, that quite often the responses they give to people are, oh, you have this, therefore take this, rather than looking at it holistically. And so you were given the answer by your doc, you've got hypothyroidism, and that was it. He wasn't, by the sounds of it, prepared to look deeper holistically as to what else was going on. So the hypothyroidism was really just a reaction to something else that was going on. So that's really interesting. And if you weren't you and your abilities that you have, I'm not trying to describe you as superhuman, by the way, although you might well be superhuman. But I mean, because of your mindset, to delve deeper, if you weren't like that, you would still be suffering the conditions that you had back then. So it's very interesting that you were able to do this. So could you talk to me about this PGC1 alpha? It's not it's not something I've come across before. Could you just describe what that is, please?
Yeah, so everyone knows what PGC1 alpha does without knowing that it's PGC1 alpha doing it. So we know that there's this whole collection of things that's related to metabolism. So we know that diabetes is related to metabolism. Your sleep cycle in some way is related to it. Aging is in some way related. Your ability to either burn or store fat is related to it. But we don't realize that there's really one protein that feeds into the other proteins that control that. So you can talk about like the sirtuin family of proteins and NRF1 and NRF2. And that's what you'll find a lot of in the research. So you can see that certain diseases, they've linked to problems with these proteins. And when we talk about proteins in this sense, we're also talking about genes, because the genes of that same name produce that enzyme, basically. So PGC1 alpha is a gene, but it's also a protein. It's also, an enzyme. So PGC1 alpha is at the very top of all of those things that control every aspect of your metabolism. So and we can measure this really, really effectively in the research. So you can measure how activated your PGC1 alpha is. And that's how we know this stuff. So if you are really effectively producing this protein, then your metabolism is balanced. Your sleep cycle is what it should be. Your hormones are what they should be. Your blood sugar is what it should be. And there are even much more specific aspects of that are being studied, like non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is in some way modulated by PGC1 alpha. So when you can activate PGC1 alpha, you can just sort out anything metabolic and age related, unless you have some other, just some other factor that's affecting it. But on a basic level, that's the mechanism, is PGC1 alpha.
Now, the PG bit, I'm going to sound like a complete dullard now, but is the PG bit something to do with pineal gland?
To do with what?
The pineal gland.
No, I can't remember what it stands for right now, to be honest with you.
Don't worry, you don't have to say. I was just suddenly thinking that gland obviously produces so many different neurochemicals that I thought maybe it's got something to do with that, but obviously not. That's just me being an idiot. Let's say somebody watching this channel right now unfortunately suffers one of the conditions that you had before. And there is no one answer, I realize, to any one of those conditions. But what should they do you think, initially? Because you had to find your way. And in finding your way, you found the answer. But I would imagine some people could probably skip some of those first steps, because part of that was you searching. So what do you think?
Oh, gosh. There are a few things that I wish I had known before I started this healing journey. And that's probably the best advice that I could give anyone just starting out, and there's at least 10, and I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but I would say, number one, get your teeth checked by a biological dentist. And that sounds completely unrelated, but get a cone beam CT scan from a biological dentist before you do anything else.
I don't even know if we have them in this country.
Probably. You might not have them in smaller cities, but they're not that hard to find. There's probably going to be one within driving distance of you, and they will be dentists that use things like ozone gas instead of antibiotics. And ozone is, in the research, the best antibiotic that exists. It can deal with bacterial infections like MRSA, that there are no antibiotics. There are no antibiotics for some types of MRSA. So ozone is this really amazing antimicrobial. It's also a PGC1 alpha activator. But if you find a dentist that uses ozone therapy in his practice, they're a biological dentist. So you could even search ozone dentistry, and you would probably be able to come up with a biological dentist. And they are essentially holistic dentists. So what we know for a fact is that if you have one of these mystery illnesses, you probably have something going on with your teeth. And it could be an old root canal. It could be a titanium implant. And I have 4 titanium dental implants. I was just born without 4 adult teeth in the back of my mouth.
Wow.
So when I was 18, I did 2 of them, and I was able to hold on to the other 2 until I was about 27, right when this mold illness stuff started. And then I replaced those with 2 titanium implants. And what I found after I started to heal, but didn't really get 100% better, was that my intuition was telling me there was something going on with one of those titanium implants. So I found a biological dentist. We did a cone beam CT scan, and I had an abscess that had probably been there for 10 years. And 10 years ago was when all of my problems started. So you can't just have these things removed and then everything gets better, but you can't get better without having those things addressed. So that would probably be the first thing I would recommend is see a biological dentist. Make sure that you're not going to spend 10 years trying to heal yourself just to find out that you need to have an extraction and then go through the process again. Because that's essentially what happened to me.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you mentioned there's kind of a list of 10. You don't have to go through all of those now, but if somebody out there right now wanted to understand that process a bit better, starting off with a biological dentist, and that's new to me, I'm glad we're talking so that I can look up ozone dentistry. But could they go on your website, for example, and would there be a list of the steps?
Yes, I actually have a blog post, and you can search it in my Experimental Betty blog, so experimentalbetty.com. There's a search bar, and you can search, I think, 10 things I wish I had known before trying to heal myself.
Excellent. Where are you now on your journey? Are you completely clear of the conditions that you've had, or do you occasionally get flare-ups?
Yeah, so it's a process for someone like me and any of my self-healers. We're all highly sensitive people, and that's something that I've just recently discovered. We all have Rh negative blood. Every single person that finds me with the same issues is missing the Rh factor, and it just makes us a little bit more susceptible to environmental triggers. And it can be physical environment, or it can be the environment in your mind. It can be your thoughts. So for me, it is always something that I will be paying attention to. There's never going to be some pinnacle of health where I don't have to worry about it, because in essence, you know, everything that happens with us in terms of illness is genetics plus environment. With the exception of infectious disease, which is basically just environment. But for the most part, your genetics will never change, but your environment will. So if you are not always paying attention to your environment, after a prolonged period of some type of exposure, whether it's to stress, negative thoughts, mold, or chemicals or something, you will basically go back into the same set of symptoms that you had before. And for me, that actually happened within the past 6 months. I had healed from mold illness. I still have no lupus biomarkers, none of that. And I went back into a moldy hospital to finish my dietetic internship, to be credentialed as a dietitian. And after about 5 weeks, I started getting all of this depression, all of my mold illness symptoms, and I knew that there was mold there, but I didn't have chronic inflammatory response syndrome from it. I was just a healthy person who was being exposed to mold, because mold's not good for anyone, you know. So I had symptoms. It just wasn't the full-blown SIRS, would be the abbreviation. And I watched a documentary where they were following people with mold illness and Lyme. And I knew I shouldn't have watched it, but I was so curious. And it put me back into that state of mind of having chronic mystery illness. So it put me back into that trauma that I obviously had not dealt with, of having an illness that nobody could see, nobody understood, nobody believed, and knowing that I still had 5 more weeks to be in this hospital. So that was the activator. Believe it or not, mold made me sick this last time, but it wasn't the activator. The thoughts, the mindset, the trauma was the epigenetic activator. And after the 10 full weeks of being in mold, I did have SIRS again, and I measured it with blood work before and after. And within probably 2 months, I no longer had SIRS. I had deactivated it. And now I am post all of that. So now my blood work, my symptoms, all of that is totally normalized. But I do know that if I went back into a moldy environment for a prolonged period of time, because I have the genetic susceptibility, it would just be, it would only be a matter of time before I had the issue again. So it's something that you're always going to work on.
That's really interesting. I think also interesting about the power of the mind there. The same reasons why people quite often fall ill because of depressive thoughts, not that you were depressive there, are exactly the same reasons why people can heal themselves through positive thoughts. You've really hit on a really interesting subject, interesting topic there, I think. Does it mean now then that you are overly mindful of these things? I did a video today actually about that in a way, the more knowledge you accrue, and I was in particular talking about food intolerances, but the more knowledge you accrue, the more overly analytical you get about everything to do with food. I would imagine probably the same is for you, but you can't surround yourself with a completely clinical environment. So you must manage it, I'm guessing, in some fashion.
Yeah, so once you have really activated PGC1 alpha, you can chill out a little bit. You don't have to be so overly critical. And I do things all the time that I know are generally a bad idea for me. And I bounce right back. and that's kind of where you get, is that you reach a point where you don't have to be so myopic about everything. And there's a lot of empowerment there. But I do fall back into that state of mind sometimes where I'm overly analyzing certain things. And with mold, it took me a really long time to not overanalyze a situation. And I still will Google Earth the roof of a building before I go in it. So if if I'm trying to, and that's what is so hard about environmental illness, is that you can't always know where you're where you're going to be is a safe place for you. But I'll still do it. I'll if I have to go to a new doctor or anything to get my hair done, I'll Google image it, click on satellite view, investigate the roof, try to see if there's pictures of the inside, and then I'll make a decision. Because if there's going to be mold there, what's the point of going there? It's an activator for you. But in the same token, if I really want to do something, like I wanted to spend time with my girlfriends this past Christmas, and I knew that they had just had a leak in the basement of their house, and they had, redone the floors, everything that you're supposed to do. But knowing what I know that there's more to it, so I do have that. You can't unlearn what you know about these things. And knowing what I knew, I still went, I still had a good time, and I still bounced back. But I could feel that there was something there that I was sensitive to, that the whole past 10 years where we did this, I didn't have that. So yes, I do know exactly what you're talking about. You do become overly critical of your environment, whether it's food or the air or whatever. But once you reach a certain point, you can take a step back and think, well, am I going to be able to bring my body back into harmony even if I do this thing? And if the answer is yes, then you don't have to be that critical.
I think also I would imagine that some exposure to these things, that be they toxins or not, is probably a good thing, for the same reason that we know when you're looking at antibodies and things like that, that you expose yourself to something, you build a tolerance, and that's probably a good thing as long as you don't overdo it. And that's my justification when I eat the wrong foods.
Well, and that is in essence how you activate PGC1 alpha. Not necessarily toxins, but hormetic stress. So thermogenesis, like you do a lot of, and exercise, all of these things are essentially what you're describing. You hurt yourself a little bit, but the response your body mounts in reaction to that is making you stronger in the long run. So that is a big question that a lot of people ask. Is there any amount of mold exposure that has a hormetic effect? And we don't know, but I tend to justify it the same way you do, because what else are you going to do? You know?
Well, yeah. You either do the Michael Jackson bubble thing, or you live your life normally. And I'm definitely one for normalizing my life. So I'd like to draw this now as we sort of close to really, I suppose, just a way of you promoting you, because you've got this wonderful Instagram growing following of, as I know you call them, self-healers, which I think is brilliant. And there's so many other topics, by the way, that we haven't covered yet. And I would love to do this again on another chat, because there's so many things that you do that I find interesting. It would be great to delve into one. So we're just sticking at this point on this one topic. But going back to you, you've got your IG profile, you've got your website, or what else do you do that's worthwhile promoting here? In the right way, I think, but especially for others that might be suffering at the moment. How might you be able to help them?
Yeah, so I actually have a program where I teach people how to activate their self-healing mechanism. I call it the Self-Healer Program. And it's basically people that have been through what I've been through and haven't been able to heal themselves. So I give you all of the research on all of these 8 evidence-based ways to activate PGC1 alpha that you can essentially do at home. And I don't just give you the research on the ones that helped me. I give you all of the research, because what I've come to realize is, especially from doing biomedical research myself, is that whatever worked for a significant amount of people or worked significantly well doesn't translate to what will work for you. So I give you everything. All of the research is a decade worth of personal research that I've done, and it's coming through the critical lens of someone who actually knows how to do research and knows how to read the methods and not just skim the abstract. So I give you the research, I give you practical tools to implement these things. I actually give you one-on-one coaching. I just went back to this this method. So I'd been doing group coaching with my self-healers, and I just got this download from the universe. It was like, no, give them one-on-one time. Like, that's what you want to do it. So now I'm doing a hybrid program. So now the Self-Healer Program is this online course with all of these resources for you, plus one-on-one coaching with me every single month. And that's what makes me happy. And I think that's where people get the most benefit. So I teach you how to do that. There's a huge mindset component. I teach you how to muscle test, which is a really interesting way to create an additional line of evidence in your health decisions. So it's not a diagnostic tool, and it's not even objective. It's a highly subjective thing, but it teaches you how to better understand your body, and it carries over into every single area of your life. You really fine-tune your intuition when you understand the neuro-linguistic kinetic response that your body has to your environment. So those are probably the biggest things. And we spend the whole last chapter balancing your gut and nasal microbiome. And if you're overlooking the nasal microbiome, you are overlooking a really important thing.
So my son is offering me a love heart. Thank you, Lockie, because it's Valentine's Day, of course.
Oh yes, happy Valentine's Day.
To you. Thank you, Lockie. That's very kind. Thanks very much. Yeah, they are. I'm just finishing this off, Lots, and then I'll come and have a little chat to you.
So cute.
Is there anything, would you say, is there any illness that wouldn't relate to what you've done? In other words, let's say if somebody were suffering from ME, for example.
Mm-hmm. That is actually one of the things that the Self-Healer Program has had the best results for.
Really?
Yes, absolutely. Basically any mystery illness, or what Western medicine perceives as mystery illness, is a good fit for activating your self-healing mechanism. There are some things that you will still have to do things in addition to the self-healer program. So I have clients that have Lyme disease, and you can't heal Lyme without activating your self-healing mechanism, but it's not going to be the one thing that heals your Lyme. So you're still going to have to do additional things, and I point people in that direction. So if I have a client that comes to me with something that I know I'm going to be able to help them substantially with, like this is a critical piece of their healing journey to activate PGC1 alpha, but it's not the only piece. I can tell them this is what you need to look for in your area. So I have guided clients to heavy metal IV chelation after they had a positive heavy metal test. I had a client with a positive hair heavy metal test, and I was like, well, we're going to be able to heal you from a lot of things, but I'm not going to be able to heal that. So this is what you need to look for in your area, because I personally went through 4 years of IV heavy metal detoxification. So I think for me, the benefit of having all of this, going through all of this pain, healing myself for the past 10 years, is that I know what I can help people with and what the limitations are. And I know that there are limitations to everything. So I'm never going to say one thing is the be all end all, but I 9 times out of 10 will be able to point you in the direction.
Yeah, I love it. That's brilliant. And I don't know if so you mentioned your blog, but could you just run through all the different platforms you're on so that people know how to find you?
Yeah, experimentalbetty.com is the blog. Instagram, I'm experimental_Betty. You can also go to the Self Healer Institute and see the actual curriculum of the Self Healer program and the other 3 programs that I do. I have one that's specifically for depression and anxiety and addiction, and we actually discover your biotype and correct the underlying nutrient imbalance. So you can see all of the curriculum there. If you go to my Instagram, you can actually book a free call with me. I am one of the very few people who are not afraid to get on the phone, and I love connecting with people. So that would probably be the best way to connect with me. And then I have a YouTube channel, Experimental Betty.
Yes, I love it. This is brilliant. So this, well, let's face it then, there is no excuse if somebody wants to contact you. They can very easily. And by the sounds of it, talk to you. That is brilliant.
Yes.
This is great. As I say, I think we should do another one because there's so much in your background that I think would prove interesting. But this for me has definitely been interesting, and I would imagine for many of the guys that watch my YouTube channel will find it super interesting. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I really enjoyed this one. Thank you.